real big trickle-down effect to things like the city's budget or the county's budget that many of you may be more familiar with. Then I jumped forward to 2013 when this last year we saw some big tax cuts that were enacted again. So a 10% income tax reduction, a 50% reduction to business income tax, several other tax changes that came that were of smaller value or cost less, but another big change to our revenue and tax policy. And I say this partly because this is the way we see the world, but largely, again, because no matter what you care about, if your thing is education or your thing is healthcare or your thing, whatever it might be, this is the dollars that make it possible, right? This is the amount of appropriation that's possible as a result of the policy changes that take place. So then here we are in 2014. So we just passed this budget. We're going into an election year. And we're about to come upon this mid-biennium review that I'll talk about here in a little bit. But that's kind of the context of where we've been. So let me just say, as I go through here, if you have a burning question, like if something immediately comes up, people should just jump in, because this will get really boring for me and really boring for you if I just talk the entire time directly. So people should jump in. So Nancy, go ahead, and then I'm going to get into this list here in a second.
If all the votes are 22 or 23 to 10,
yeah,
who is telling those 22 people how to vote?
Yeah. So there are votes that aren't that way. I should just say, there are certainly votes that don't. It's just partisan lines are pretty typical. The short answer would be legislative leadership in general, party caucus leadership. So, for instance, in the Senate, Senator Faber is the Senate leader and the president of the Senate, and he's pretty well regarded as being a very powerful man who very much wields that power in his caucus. Similarly, in the House with Speaker Batchelder. So, the short answer would be there's typically a pretty clear party line that comes down on both sides of the aisle. So
you would say it's not a lobbyist like in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I mean, lobbyists wield a lot of power. And
the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or powerful labor groups? Or...
Yeah. No, I think those groups definitely wield power, some more than others in the current reality. But I think they would wield their power on the legislative leaders who would then whip their people into shape to say, here's where we're going to be on this. I think that's the general, power analysis that folks have. I will say that, as I've kind of gotten connected to the lobbyist community in Columbus, it's pretty clear that folks think that lobbyists have more power since the changes to term limits. For instance, I talk a lot about what happened in 2005. Just the other day, I was talking to this guy, Senator Eaker, who's from down here in southern Ohio, and he's one of the few legislators I've talked to in a while that even knows what happened in 2005 from direct experience, and even the ones that came in a year later don't oftentimes, they didn't really look backwards very much. So the lobbyists are oftentimes kind of the bridge of the information, which is sometimes scary.
Yeah. Gavin, quick question about the $1 billion figure from 2005.
Yeah.
Was that more or less than what was predicted at the time? And we know what that figure is now. I mean,
yeah.
Is there a record on that?
Yeah, so the short answer is that if you can kind of imagine it, this is what happens at the Statehouse, and I think here too, anywhere in politics, is you get in your little world. So I can't tell you how often there's this conventional wisdom where everybody's like, this is what's going on. And then it changes all the time, but when you're in it, you're like, no, there's no way anything's going to change. So when you talk about what happened in 2005, what most people that are being honest will tell you is that the folks who were pushing for the major tax changes wanted to shrink government, right? That was the main reason. And what they said was they used maybe folks have heard of the Laffer curve, this idea that this economist Arthur Laffer had put out that if you have more growth, you cut taxes, people have more money in their pockets, more business will come, that'll grow jobs in the economy, and then as a result you'll have more tax revenue, for instance, that comes in to pay for things. It's been a disproven theory pretty consistently, but in 2005 that was held up as hey, we're going to cut taxes, this is a great economic time, and then as a result we're going to get jobs and growth, and that's going to make up the difference. But in their defense, there wasn't really a whole lot of pushback because the economic times were pretty good. So there wasn't a lot of pushing. But the promise was sort of, we're going to cut taxes, we're going to make jobs and growth happen as a result. And the sort of structural deficit that was created, unfortunately, didn't get a whole lot of play at the time. So let me just do this quick snapshot so I can see what other folks, because if everybody wants to talk about 2005, I would love that. That's well, let's see where folks are at. So anybody? So you get 3 votes. So of these issues and the top issues, so can you just raise your hands? I'm just going to try to take a quick count. Who's interested in talking about the elections for this fall? Okay. Okay. What about state of the state? Who wants to hear about the state of the state? Okay. It was kind of boring anyway, so that's good. Mid-biennium review. Ooh, okay, you guys just talking my language here. All right. Nitty-gritty stuff. Okay, voting rights. Who wants to talk about voting rights? Okay. All right. Capital budget, bond issue. Anybody?
You get 3 for each section?
3 for each section. Yeah, you can't vote for everything. Okay. And then opiate addiction problems. Okay. Okay, now below the surface. Who wants to talk about so-called right to work? Okay, good. Redistricting. Yeah, okay. This is kind of predictable so far. Municipal income tax reform. Poverty safety net program investment. Okay. Medicaid expansion. Implementation specifically. Campaign finance reform. Okay, you guys ready? This was a trick. There's nothing going on with campaign finance. Almost nothing at all. I brought that as a special nod to the Community Issues Forum because I came here several years ago. I remember as Tyron Yates was talking, and he kept referencing all these problems with campaign finance reform. And I think I was like, I don't know, 22 or something at the time, and I was like, so who's working on that? He was like, nobody, and then just like kept going. And I was like, well, that seems stupid. Well, so I'm here to say it's still stupid. And then stand your ground. Anybody? Okay. Okay. All right. So that gives me a sense. So what I'm going to do as a result of that is I'm going to go through all these very briefly, but then I'm going to focus what I talk about for a little bit longer on these key things. So it's 12:30 now. I'm going to shoot for talking for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have hopefully lots of time for questions and conversation about these things. Sound okay? So here's the top issue. So I think if you walk around Capitol Square and you said, what are the things that people are really talking about the most? I think these 6 are the ones that are getting the most play. And the biggest thing that everybody looks through every issue toward right now is the elections for statewide offices this fall, in particular the governor's race between John Kasich and probably Ed Fitzgerald. He does have to run in a primary, although it's not thought to be a primary that will be particularly competitive. So the elections for this fall are big. And then the other sort of context point on the elections for this fall is that increasingly you'll hear talk around Capitol Square about Governor Kasich running for president in 2016. And so if you can imagine, all the policy conversation sort of gets through this lens of how will it play in politics, and then even how will it play in presidential politics. So that when I say that the State of the State address was pretty boring, the conventional wisdom on why it was boring is because while typically the governor kind of goes off and goes on tangents and is pretty well known and is sort of proud of his just kind of loose cannon kind of approach, which frankly is a lot more interesting than speeches like the State of the State, which are pretty scripted. And the assumption is the reason he's being pretty scripted is because it's an election year. He's ahead. He doesn't want to He don't want to mess with that. Doesn't want to ruffle feathers, and he's trying to set the stage for the possibility of a presidential run. That's how a lot of people that I work with or that I work around are sort of thinking about or talking about these issues. And so that's, I think, important for people to understand. The other thing about elections for statewide office I didn't put on here is to talk about the ballot landscape. So I'll mention the bond issues here in a second, but one of the really interesting things that's not on the radar for this fall and that a lot of people have been talking about behind the scenes is the fact that there are not any major ballot issues that are expected to be on the ballot. There is a push for a voting rights related initiative that has not gotten a lot of steam so far. There is the possibility of a marriage equality related initiative, but it is unlikely that will go on based on what folks are talking about. There's also the likelihood of a medicinal marijuana related initiative, also generally by insiders considered to be unlikely. And then you'll hear these little snippets. So anything could go on if it gets signatures by July 3rd. The further it goes in the process, the less likely it is it's going to happen. So it's feeling less likely there'll be any other issues. Yes?
I've heard that, again, it probably wouldn't make it, but a right to work,
Yeah.
so-called, I should say, right
Yeah.
to work ballot issue, is
Yeah.
there any possibility that's going to make it?
I have not heard, right now, every time I say conventionalism, it is a nod to the fact that it will change. That is me acknowledging that I am saying something that will change at some point. But the conventional wisdom is no, that it won't be on. The concern by most people